Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ingrid Boudet, and I'm founder of No More Noise Toronto, No More Noise, which started as No More Noise Toronto. And we are a federal not-for-profit organization. We are about 3 years old, is how we've been kind of online for 3 years, and we've continued to develop our membership and our followers because noise impacts all of us. So I'm thrilled for this presentation tonight. Dewey Lexono is going to be talking about sounds of the city, how noise pollution reshapes wildlife, and you can see her waving in the screen there, which is awesome. Thanks, Dewey. A little bit more about No More Noise Toronto. We are basically focused on the noises that wake us up, keep us up, and disturb us day and night. So as I was saying before, we're mostly focused on the human impact of noise. However, the impact of noise on our wildlife is not at all to be underestimated, and in fact it's getting worse. And I think one of the things that I have that really brought this to mind for me was post-COVID. Well, first of all, those first couple of months of the pandemic, wasn't that gorgeous? Like we could just actually sleep with the window open. It was wonderful. And I heard robins from my 25th story condo. But they actually say, so I don't know if you know, but they were saying that on the Richter scale, the Earth actually moved less during those first 2 months of COVID, because that's how much our transportation moves our planet. It actually creates this vibration. And so there was an absolute drop in the movement of the Earth that was captured on the Richter scales. The other thing was that they noticed that because ship traffic stopped and air traffic stopped, they could actually do research and studies on the impact of noise. Like in 2024, they could look back at 2020 and go, oh, look, at this time we collected these samples from, this was beluga whales, and they could see that there was less stress in their feces during the time of the pandemic when there was less traffic. So our noise has a huge impact on animals, and so I'm really looking forward to what Dewey has to share with you today. Um, and so we have been working for 3 years with the University of Toronto, and we've had 7 geography students come through. Ah, hello, Pamela. Excellent. So we've had 7 geography students come through our program, and I pride myself on making and providing really good work experience for students. And so it's a pleasure to have them. So 7 geography students, 3 environmental studies students. We've been doing this for 3 years, and tonight we're gonna hear from Dewey. So with that, I'm going to just do a little acknowledgement. And this is to just recognize that the peoples that were here before us, the indigenous peoples of the lands everywhere on the planet, had a unique relationship with the sound of their environment. And when you think about it, excuse me, sound and what we hear indicates the biodiversity, the health, the plentifulness of that environment. And there is this one book, and it's called Sounds of Life by Karen Bakker. By Karen Bakker, there we go. She unfortunately passed away, but she lived in Vancouver. And this book, if you ever get a chance to pick it up, it is amazing because it talks about how the indigenous peoples have, how they interacted with the planet and how they interacted with the animals and hunted with orcas and all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. But also, they talk about how coral actually hears, even though they don't have any kind of hearing apparatus. Their little villi that pushes them through the water can hear, and they can actually go back to their home coral. And that's how they're looking at rehabilitating coral, is by playing sound underwater that is the sound of their home coral. It's like amazing, and I'm seeing Dewey nod, so that's awesome. So I think with that, um, we should just jump right over into Dewey's presentation. And I'm very pleased to introduce her. She is an environmental science and human geography student. And so with that, Dewey, you should have the say hello and then absolutely share your screen, okay? And just remember to come off mute.
Yep. I just want to make sure that people can see my slides, and if I
Hi.
move it, can people see it?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely. Well done.
perfect.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to see you all today. My name is Bailey. I'm an environmental science and human geography student from the University of Toronto. And today I'm going to present about noise and biodiversity. Before we start, I'll be going over some case studies and then we'll talk about some policies that are in place in the context of Toronto. And yeah, without further ado, let's get to it. So, talking about orcas, I want to start my case studies with orcas. I think it's a great example of collaboration of multiple stakeholders in terms of noise in Canada. And one great example actually comes from the coast of Vancouver Island, where the Snuggumix First Nation leads a project to monitor underwater ship noise and its impact on the southern resident orcas, which is actually an endangered population. How did they monitor this? Well, they placed some hydrophones and recorded passing ships and orca calls and see if there's any interference between the noise. And the finding is clear, I'm sure we all know. Noise makes it harder for orcas to communicate and navigate. And most specifically, low frequency noise makes it harder for orcas to find their food, which is salmon. And group calls also become so much harder for them, which makes them often get separated with their kin, which creates a lot of stress for them. And it's another concern about our biodiversity. Now, moving on to land, let's talk about another animals that gets harmed by noise, but we often forget, which is frogs. So frogs actually rely a lot on sound to attract mates and defend their territory. And what makes it concerning, especially in the urban context, is that many frog calls falls within the same frequency range as traffic noise. So their calls are often masked, which leads to a lot of complications. There is actually a study published in 2010 which compared frog calling in quiet ponds versus busy roads. And what they found is that in places near highways, these frogs had almost no calling activity at all. And species like the one that's featured in the slides here, spring peepers, are gone from loud sites, which is very concerning. And some frogs have tried adapting, but it still doesn't solve the traffic noise problem. And the key idea that I want to bring about in this case study specifically is the loss of acoustic habitat, which is when something that looks healthy, for example, a wetland that's just sitting next to a highway, is actually dysfunctional, but we don't even notice that. And they're dysfunctional because of noise interference that creates loss of species that people just don't see, like the frogs. And it just highlights the invisibility of the issue. Noise pollution is often being considered as normalized because it's invisible. And that's a problem for us. Now, moving on to a very exciting topic, birds also rely heavily on sound. As we know, they sing to communicate, to defend their territory, to find mates. But what makes them different from frogs is they're actually more able to migrate than frogs, right? Frogs are more sensitive. They can only stay in wetlands, whereas birds can just fly. But what's interesting is that there's a study published in 2022 that talks about how noise changes which birds we see because they're sensitive to sound. So this study actually found a clear pattern of how noise really affects birds, and they found that noise centers has significantly less species than quiet forest areas. This means that species richness decreased as noise levels increase. So the louder it gets, the less species we found. And it explains why oftentimes in the city we can only find rock pigeons or ravens, for example, instead of a parakeet, because they have to compete with urban noise, which uses extra energy for them and causes them stress. So they had to move away to the quiet forests. And in the city, we're just left with domesticated birds like pigeons. And in the context of Toronto, it also explains why park near major roads, for example, also have fewer species. Also, a shout out here. One of my favorite bird is Alexandrine parakeet, that is featured here, the green one, and they're actually a part of the IUCN Red List, which means that they're endangered. And the reason why they're endangered is actually because of noise, because their habitat is continuously affected by noise. And they had to keep moving away, and their territory keeps getting outcompeted by other species. Now, moving on to other living things that's not animals. Since biodiversity includes all living things, it only makes sense if I talk about urban forests, which is my favorite topic. Their relationship with noise is actually quite interesting. So, tree morphology, their trunks, their roots, their leaves actually absorbs and scatters sound, which is a great thing for natural barriers and buffers to traffic noise. And a study in 2021 actually found that areas with more bigger and taller tree covers are quieter. This might sound stupid, but the city actually defines urban forests as just one or two trees. But in order for us to have a good buffer, it needs to actually be more than just one or two trees, right? It needs to be an urban forest ecosystem. Because with this urban forest ecosystem, they actually contribute to a larger noise reduction within 500 meters, which actually would be so nice if we were able to combine that with the frog story that we had earlier, because their their territory is affected around 500 meters from the noise source, which is the urban roadways. And I think what's important to highlight here that this urban forests actually create a habitat that is very important for wildlife. Since it not only create a natural soundscape, but it also gives them their home that they need, that we continuously violate through building more roads or building more highways. And for the context of Toronto, I think it's also important to plant tree that is dense and uses native species along major roads, since I think it can also improve sound conditions in the area. Now, from all of these case studies, it's clear that noise has a harmful effect on wildlife. But these evidence will go nowhere without policy, since it's the only one that determines what actions can be taken and what enforcement can be given. So in the next slides, I'm going to talk about how noise and biodiversity is addressed across municipal, provincial, and federal levels. So starting with municipal, here's the list of policy documents that I looked at. And we can see here that in most documents, noise isn't treated as environmental pollution, contradicting to our evidence earlier. And one thing that I can highlight is that even the bird-friendly certificate here doesn't even acknowledge noise. And as we know, birds is clearly affected and they get stressed from all of this noise. And there's a clear species reduction, but there's no policy that protects it. And what's actually interesting is Toronto is actually bird-friendly certified, and we know that it can get noisy sometimes, especially along the 401. So I think the city actually benefit from a little bit of a loophole here that is not enforced at all. Um, yeah. So based on the documents, we can also see that noise and biodiversity are actually governed separately. When one document focuses on noise, for example, the Chapter 591 or the Noise Action Plan, they don't see the problem in biodiversity. Whereas Toronto Biodiversity Strategy, they don't see a problem in noise. So I think there's a clear, separate mindset that they put when they're um, when they're building these documents, which I think is clear as a clear mismatch that we need to address on. And on top of that, as I mentioned, most policies also ignore noise and therefore isn't makes it not enforceable in ecological context. And from here, we could also see that when they enforce it, it only occurs on practical cases and only applies to humans. Now, the provincial also has a similar case. We can see that noise is also mostly not treated as a pollution. And when they do, it's rarely operationalized, For example, the EPA acknowledged the importance of acoustic habitat, but they rarely enforce it since it's not operationalized. So no one really knows what to do with it. And for the environmental noise guideline, they actually operationalized it, but they only focused on enabling development. And once the plan is approved, the developing plan is approved, noise will be sidelined and treated as normal or as a trade-off to growth. And from there, we can see that at the provincial level, most policies did not operationalize noise as an environmental condition, and it makes it harder to enforce it. And we can also see a clear pattern in all of these documents. For example, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the provincial policy statement, and as we heard from a couple years ago, they're almost sidelined the Green Belt plan to build more things. So we can see there's a clear pattern of prioritizing growth and development, which obviously sidelines noise pollution. Also, one thing to highlight here, in any of these documents that I read, moving vehicles like traffic are largely unaddressed. There's a clear um, there's a clear problem about traffic, but we can see that the government really don't care about it, or they see it as a threat to growth. Now, moving on to federal level, here are the environmental policies that I looked at. And as you can see here, most of the language are very broad and high level since it's a federal level. But one thing that I want to highlight is that noise is only sometimes mentioned, especially under the IAA or the Impact Assessment Act. But the thing about that is that they will review the projects before approval. But once a project is approved, the ongoing noise is treated as acceptable. So there's a real clear problem with that. There's also aren't a clear noise threshold tied to biodiversity protection in the federal level either, apart from the ocean noise strategy, which is the only exception. And also from here, we can see that there's no strong enforcement tools specifically for acoustic habitat, similar to our provincial and municipal documents that we just looked at. So again, noise is rarely translated into enforceable standards and is often normalized. And the only interesting thing about the federal level is that marine ecosystems are the exception. And if I could say it's the only exception that care about noise. So in the ocean, noise is recognized as an ecological harm. And that's why we see the monitoring and indigenous-led collaborations like we saw with the orcas and the sunny moose protection. But that level of recognition still doesn't exist on urban or terrestrial environments. So still a clear problem. Now, before we get deeper into our discussion, I want to make clear about the PESTLE framework that I use to assess these policies. So PESTLE stands for Political, Economic, Social, Technological, Legal, and Environment. And the idea here is to get a transdisciplinary view of the issue across all the 6 dimensions and understand the key gaps that we have at a scale. So here are some of the lists of the questions that I use to help navigate the policy documents. And here is the analysis that I did. I know it looks overwhelming, but I'm gonna get to the point. So when we step back and look across all policy levels using the PESTLE framework, there's a clear pattern that we can see here. The first one, noise and biodiversity are framed separately, which prevents anyone to do an integrated action. The second one is political and economic priorities still focus on growth, even when they generate chronic noise impacts, like the Rogers Stadium, for example. Noise is often seen as unavoidable. And the third one is that legal authority exists, but it's very narrow and hard to apply. And they could only enforce it when it's a small scale problem. So the main thing about this is that it's not that there are no policies, it's that they don't connect and they aren't operationalized, so no one can enforce it. Now, in terms of enforcement, the reality is enforcement tends to work only for short-term visible disturbances. For example, like amplified noise or for unauthorized activities or, like unauthorized parties or something like that. It doesn't really work well for background traffic noise or large infrastructure, especially when it's necessary for economic growth, like they mentioned. And in terms of technology, there's noise study and data, but they don't really trigger policy action. It's only recommendations. So chronic noise just continues. Also, I want to highlight that noise, again, has become so normalized in society that it's hard to regulate even for human beings. So when it comes to wildlife, there's basically no monitoring or enforcement mechanism tied directly to ecological impact. And that's the gap that we have, which we need to look into. Now, there's a lot more discussions that needs to happen about this, but for the scope of this study and for the interest of time, that will be it for my presentation. I hope you enjoy and thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dewey. Learned a ton. That was well done, and you did nice pacing as well. That's awesome. Thank you. So if you want to just stop sharing there for the moment.
Yeah.
And so interesting because what we see as noise protection for humans, which we had in December, and now noise protection for wildlife, there's disconnects all over the place, and this is where it's not recognized as a health hazard properly. And I love how you connected how that noise is one set of policies and biodiversity is another set of policies, and just to put humans into it, and then public health is another set. Like they are all absolutely in their own silos. And so as No More Noise, we are certainly working to and determine where we want to put our efforts and where we think we could get the most return for um, for our efforts. And so, where's the lowest hanging fruit? Where's so I guess, Dewey, my question to you is where would you suggest that we as an organization start to either influence change or push the needle? Like where do you think that rests?
I think, especially for specifically noise and biodiversity, there's only so much we can do right now. But for noise and biodiversity in this political climate, as we can see from all the policy documents and all the political climate that we have right now, it's still focused on economic growth and stability.
Yeah.
So biodiversity often becomes a budget issue and noise is treated as normal. But I think we can start by raising awareness and talk
Mm.
about it more. I think if more people understand that sound is important and sound is affecting all of us, um, and sound is also a part of a habitat, like acoustic habitat is very important. That's where change, at least for biodiversity, can begin. But I feel like it's all of these policy documents already um, focused on human side of things. So maybe one fight can start another fight, like it's like a domino effect. So
Yeah.
if we want like at least on the health part or on the human part, which I think would be a lot more easier to bring forward, um, we could at least like bring attention to noise in the first place, and then later on biodiversity can come with it. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, awareness, right? And so Linda came on the call a little bit earlier and she was saying, people, we just don't understand the impact of noise on ourselves and also on animals. And I just wanted to, so where I'm able to stay outside of Toronto, and thank goodness, because I think I'd be losing my mind. But where I am, there's a pond. And those spring peepers, oh my goodness, they're loud. There's lots of them. But then you can just sort of see how then, like, I mean, I down in Toronto, when you're by the waters, and I'm able to walk in High Park and stuff, you just don't hear them. And those frogs are food. And so this is how the biodiversity is impacted. And maybe I don't know. So Dewey, this is a question that I didn't prep you for. But if we look at biodiversity, because it's the smallest of things that feed the largest of things, right? Like you go up that food chain, and when I think about, insects and all of those, like if there's less insects, if there's less frogs, if there's less all of that, then that impacts the biodiversity going up the line. Did you come across anything like that in your research, where kind of talked about that food chain?
That chain. I didn't really specifically look at any paper about that, but I know that like food chain actually happens. Like if you lose, for example, the one of the things that I learned about was the impact of losing predators, right? So it was, I think, um the bear in Vancouver actually, when it was listed as an endangered species and before the Great Bear Rainforest was protected, um, it was mentioned that a lot of this there's a surge in salmon, and it also, even though it's great for us, like we can eat more salmon, that's good, but it's actually also a problem because it also disturbs the other food chains below it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and when there's more salmon there can and also like when there's more salmon there, there's also other things that could contaminate the salmon. And there would be more disease and pathogens that could be generated from the surge of the salmon. So I think
Mhm.
yeah, food chain here is really important.
Yeah,
But yeah,
absolutely, because it's all connected. I mean,
yeah,
it
exactly.
is the when anything I see in nature is just all connected. One supports the other. So Steve has a question here. He says, "Are you aware of any wildlife nature specific organizations that have ongoing efforts on noise pollution, such as the Audubon Society?"
Oh, I haven't really researched on that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can look into it. What is it called?
Yeah. Audubon Society. So they're a huge society. Steve, if you want to hop on, you're welcome to come off mute and come on the camera if you want to explain a little bit more. Um, but so I yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah. So why don't you share a little bit more with your question, Steve?
Sure. Really enjoyed the presentation first. Thank you very much. Um, yeah, I was wondering, uh, basically symbiotic relationship with another organization that may already have done some research and is prioritizing and maybe allocating some of their funds to explore this or advocate for it or lobby for rules and laws to help protect bird species in this case.
Yeah.
Side note, you were brought up salmon right as I was typing it in, and that goes straight back to the orcas, talking about your circle.
Mm-hmm.
Chinook salmon is their primary food source, and those orcas are in my backyard in Puget Sound here. Um, but yeah, I've thought about, reaching out to some of those type of organizations and just seeing they've got paid lobbyists, at high levels, and just seeing if maybe we could get it on their radar if it's not already.
I love that idea, Steve. And actually, as Dewey was presenting, I was searching Nature Canada, and they are the ones that then do they certify bird friendly cities. And if we think about Audubon Society, like maybe this is where we go, is we lobby these groups and say, where's noise? Where's noise in your bucket of what how you're trying to protect your feathered friends and all of those animals, right? So I just wanted to check here. So Audubon Society dedicated to the conservation of birds and their habitat. So Audubon is basically just birds. But that's where, I mean, that everybody loves birds. I was reading a study where they were saying that nature sounds actually benefit us when we listen to nature, even just in our headphones. We might be sitting on the TTC or driving in our car or whatever, but just listening to nature sounds actually reduces our stress levels, and we intuitively know this, but data is now supporting that as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I had a class about this. My prof, his name is Mark Hathaway. He has a lot of great books about this. But one of the things that he mentioned is the reason why there's a lot of like turmoil and like eco anxiety, and it spreads like in this climate, obviously with this the threat of climate change and everything, is the lack of connections between human and nature
Yeah.
and how it gets disturbed through all the things all the economic growth that is happening.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that we're looking at. So, with No More Noise, one of our pillars is supporting healthy and livable cities.
Mhm.
And so those healthy cities have trees, they have walkable spaces, they have safe walkable spaces, they have bird song in them. But one of the things again, noise is missing from of what becomes how does a city get certified as a livable city? Where's noise in all of this? And so while I sometimes think, oh my goodness, Ingrid, what have we taken on? Like this is just such a huge battle and there's big changes, but all changes start one day. All of us, we all are thankful that we no longer have to go and sit in a restaurant and listen to smoke, or sorry, listen to smoke, be subjected to secondhand smoke. I remember getting on a plane going in, being in Vancouver. I was 8 or 9 years old, and we flew to Hawaii, and there was the smoking section in the back. Like, hello, we all know that, but well, some of us don't anymore, which is great. But that movement are there's lots of lines drawn between noise and anti smoking, because at the time it was inconceivable. What do you mean I can't smoke in a restaurant? So I absolutely think that we have grounds for advancement, and that we stand on firm footing. The question is, where do we spend our time? And I think sometimes thinking about advocating for that, noise needs to be on that bird friendly cities list, noise needs to be on a healthy cities list, noise needs to be on what are the top 10 places in the world to live. Can you get a good night's sleep with your window open? That kind of thing, because traffic noise is ubiquitous. It's the worst out of all of the noises. Whenever I ask people what's the number one noise source, it's traffic noise, and especially the vanity mufflers that we have now and all of that other stuff. Steve, who's on camera, he's actually in Washington State, and we've been connected for about a year now, and we're both working together on this. And there's many other groups that are all we're all starting to come together, because this is the time, and this is the time. This is it. Let's go, right?
I
So
found,
those are some thoughts. Yeah, Steve,
I'm
please.
sorry, I found a couple of books on it. Um, this one, I guess it
Oh,
does. The Power of Tranquility in a Very Noisy World by Bernie Krause. That
nice.
one talks about the benefits of nature and quiet on the human body and our well-being. And the other one I found was The Great Animal Orchestra.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And
Bernie Krause again.
it talks about indigenous species in the indigenous peoples in the rainforest and how they relied on sound and how development impacted them so negatively, and that they would make journeys even back into the nature, into the areas where they could still get the natural sound, and they regarded it as healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when we think about healthy cities, I see that Pam. Hi, Pam. Thanks so much for joining. Nice to see you here. A point about noise and livability, and I twigged into noise. I mean, I was rambling about this a little bit before the presentation, but I was on my bike riding in Toronto, and I heard and felt before I saw a cement mixer come right by me. And of course, paint is not protection. And so this thing was like, 2 feet from me. And then I was describing that to someone else, and they were saying, how am I going to get my kid to ride a bike if those kind of things are on our streets? And this is where we need to provide those safe spaces, not only for ourselves, but also for wildlife. And if we don't support our wildlife, then that is also, we're not supporting ourselves, you know? And that's one of the biggest things that it breaks my heart actually, because when I see little chickadees and all of those little guys, and they're just so sweet and adorable and they don't have any defense, and like you said, Dewey, they can fly away, but do they have a place of refuge where they can actually rear their young, where the young are able to leave the nest and then come back? Are they able to find each other? And Steve was sharing how in Seattle they won the Super Bowl and fireworks went off, and he could see all the the birds flying around and all of that. And I just want to mention light pollution for biodiversity as well. I don't
Yes.
know.
I think
I don't know, Dewey, if you've got something maybe to add about light pollution, or if you read anything about that.
Yeah, actually, when I was reading the document from Nature Canada about the sorry, bird friendly city certificate, it's actually light is actually mentioned as one of the things that the city has to regulate, which I think I saw Linda here also puts out a point about light pollution. So yeah, I think
Thank
um
you.
if light pollution are able to be regulated, why is noise regulated when it's also affecting birds? Like,
Mm,
because their main argument for regulating light is because it's blinding the birds. But what about noise?
hmm.
Like, they're also a part of the navigation system for some birds, and also like other species too. Like, it doesn't have to be just birds, but yeah,
Yeah.
I find it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I do just want to touch a little bit about underwater noise. So I'm an open water swimmer. I used to do triathlons, and I remember swimming, and I was swimming along and I heard this and you hear the watercraft underwater. And I remember looking up and I was like, "Where is it?" And it was way across the lake, but I could still hear it. And that's what then started to twig me. Plus, I was also a dive master. I used to work in Hawaii. And I spent lots of hours underwater, and underwater is not a quiet place. You hear the rocks moving with the waves, and birds and fish are actually like they clap their beaks together and make sounds and noises. And this is where they've come to realize, and The Sounds of Life talks a lot about that. This book talks a lot about how back in World War II, they actually, the US sunk a whole bunch of listening stations in the Atlantic Basin. And so there's all of these tapes and tapes and tapes of sound that they recorded. And at first they were like, what is this? And everybody, like, there's a word for it that I'm losing I'm not going to get it, but it's where we humanize the experience. Anthropomorphic, I think that might be it, where because we can't hear underwater, we don't think that mammals can hear underwater,
Mhm.
that kind of projection, I guess. And so this is where they thought that the oceans were quiet. Well, then they had these listening posts and they're like, no, it's not quiet. And now what they're doing is they're feeding those tapes to AI and machine learning. And so then they're now able to start to understand. That's where they're saying they're actually starting to decode humpback conversations. And it's like, wow, really? But there we go. Anthropomorphism. Thanks, Pam. That's a big word. But yeah, we do it all the time. And that's where I think we've just been so ignorant and so tunnel visioned. Yeah. Dewey, I saw that you came off mute. Yeah, please.
I was just saying, yeah, sometimes we only think about what's going on in our lives that we forget about the nature that has been feeding us um positive things. So I think it's
Absolutely.
it's important to bring up that we also need to care about them.
Yeah, for our own benefit, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I remember listening to a webinar with Gil Penalosa, who was a influential in I want to say Bogota, Colombia, and created like open streets and all this kind of stuff. And what he said, what somebody once said in the webinar was that for some kids, their exposure to a forest is a city tree. And I was like, oh, that's and so I know like there are people here. I don't know where Yvonne lives. Linda, I think you're up in the Downsview area, and Pamela, I think you're over in the West End. And so there's some areas that are quite heavily treed, but there's some areas that aren't. And so when you think if a forest is a city tree or two city trees, what is nature to those people? And something that I found that I always feel when I'm in nature is that I realize that it's not all me and that I am subjected to this environment, and that there's things so much more important than us in a way because we rely on them. They don't rely on us,
Mhm.
you know? Did you want to say something, Dewey? No,
I'm
you're
just
good.
agreeing. Sorry.
Okay, good, good, good. Okay, so Steve also said here many cities have tree boards. Maybe we can help bring awareness to these boards and add noise pollution impacts benefit on nature to their lobbying efforts and reason to protect and increase the canopy. Absolutely. Dewey, you worked with Leaf, right?
Something. Yeah. So, one other thing that I found that might work for us too is that Nature Canada, for their thing about the certificate, they actually don't consider noise, but they give regulations about how much tree cover you need in the city. So they basically like completely abandon noise, but they're just finding it the tree as also a completion for noise because they think it's also a buffer. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that could be a good like mutual benefit if we work with them too, because not only that means that they can plant more trees, but we also get our noise buffer, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
But the thing with leaf is actually it's not about the amount of trees that we planted. I think they're doing a really great job, but it's more on the municipal level. They don't really want to give land that easy for us to plant because they
Mm-hmm.
also want to have other things for, like buildings
Yeah.
or, like for economic growth at the end of the day. So that's why I highlighted the thing about prioritizing economic growth because that's still the focus of our city right now.
It is,
Yeah.
and like in times like now where, affordability is an issue. There's food insecurity, and so it's really hard sometimes to draw that balance, and especially when people are suffering. But yet we're gonna just suffer further down the road, right? Like so it's a really hard balance, and I actually have a beef about this with the city of Toronto because if you look at how they named their committee, infrastructure and environment, generally what goes first has the most, is the most important. Economic and community development committee, like come on, and I really think that I would love to have a little campaign to get them to change and revisit their committee structures. But that is actually a really good visual or a analogy of the problem that we have across the board. It's about, economics and the gain, and we've had this structure in place for so long. So how do we change it? So I really like the idea with Audubon Society. Maybe we start to work with Nature Canada. And if there are people who are super interested in wildlife, we can certainly at No More Noise create a group, and we have the capability to do email campaigns nationally into the US. We have that software capability, and I know how to use it, and we're looking to train other people to use it. And we could easily do a petition to encourage Nature Canada, for example, to add noise to their criteria. And maybe if we just focus on one thing regarding noise and biodiversity, that's what we do, and we see if we can move the needle there. Because I think then that's something that um, if we can get a win on that. I just see Pam, great idea. Okay, nice to hear that. Thank you. Because we need to get our wins. And as No More Noise is focused in Toronto and we started here, I want to kind of get our win in Toronto. But if we think about biodiversity and wildlife, that's something that we can easily we can start that in Toronto, but it can impact because it's Nature Canada, and then that could get us exposure elsewhere. Yeah. So there's lots of ideas as we've been kind of sharing that noise is, it's a big problem, and there's lots of places we can go. There's policy gaps all over the place. So we have a board, and we're really looking. We're putting together our business plan. We've put together our financials. We're going for funding. We're shooting big. We're hoping for lots, because the need is great. It's been a really interesting journey. So I do just want to touch on, I did create a bit of a slide, not a slide, but I got to get back to my presentation here. So what are some of the solutions? We've talked about petitions, we've talked about trees, we've talked about buffers, we've talked about all those kind of things, but we've also talked about awareness. And thank you for all of you for coming out tonight and becoming more aware. And thank you, both Dewey and Abba and other students who are these pioneers. And I'm so thrilled that they come and they want to work with No More Noise, because we have a great relationship with the University of Toronto, but also they feel the need. And so we are working with the policymakers of the future, which just really excites me. And so we're raising that awareness there. We can also raise the awareness in public, and maybe getting on to pushing Nature Canada gives us a little bit of a media in, so to speak. Banning fireworks. Let's ban fireworks. I've heard all about the scattering of the nests. The young leave the nest. I mean, we've got fireworks on the May long weekend. That is a huge migratory weekend. Um, Dewey. And then we have them in August, when some birds are already migrating as well. And then do we have them in September? Yeah, Labor Day. And then we have the air show too. Like, it's just so much noise. Do you want to
Yes.
say something about the air show? Yeah, go
Yeah, the
ahead.
air show is crazy. And I I just sometimes I get speechless. The air show, it happens near uh what's it called? A protected area that's supposed to be protected only for nature, you know?
Yeah.
And it's also like, as mentioned in Nature Canada and in other biodiversity strategies that the city has, they they all use that waterfront area as an excuse for them to be, hey, we already have green space, but they have an air show there. Like, they don't count this disruptions that they're making, even though it
Yeah.
it contributes to a lot of damage to these species. But
And
yeah.
also humans, like, that's the other thing. People are coming from war-torn countries. They're coming and seeking refuge in Canada. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I used to love the air show, and there's a part of me that's still like, wow. And I know I've recorded them. 115 decibels is what I recorded from my balcony. So huge, right? And the birds don't know what's coming, and anyways, but that's been an interesting journey for me. So ban fireworks, plant more trees. Um, Understanding and educating people about how the sounds of nature benefits us. So Steve, thanks so much for sharing those books. If you don't mind sending me a quick email with those titles, I'm happy to include them in the resources that I'll send out. And maybe we need to go after the bird-friendly city certificate and guidelines, and we just go after Nature Canada. To me, that actually seems like they should get this. So maybe that's what my next environmental students are going to do. They're going to apply, and they're going to start pushing and seeing what we can do for that. And the other thing that I just want to mention is that we also look at a lot as a group to technology. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is having area sound level monitoring. And one of the things that I heard about the Humber River was that, there used to be, and I think it's still there, but I think the lease didn't get extended, is a yacht club that was on the Humber River. And in order to get more fees, they allowed a whole bunch of jet skis, and those jet skis ripped up and down the river. It was wild. So somebody reached out to me, and I actually put area sound level. I put our little meters. I went with a kayak and put them on trees, and it was a really interesting seeing how the difference is. We could see the spikes of the jet skis, but we could also see how overall the ambient level of noise ramped up the closer we got to the gardener. And it's like, so there's back to your, what did you say, acoustic habitat. Though that's two new words. I never put those two together before. So thank you so much for that. So, everyone, I'm just going to share my screen here real quick, and I think you're also going to get a couple of, oh, and so Pam just she put in the chat here, the lease of the yacht club has been discontinued. Yay! And I think Amber Morley was a huge proponent of that, so that's great. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone real quick, and Abba can put a couple links in the chat here. But we do have a brand new website, and I'm just going to make this bigger here. I'm going to share that screen. So we do have a brand new website, and Kathleen Payne, who is our lead communications person, she she did a really great job. And so just a couple things to that you know so that you can know about us as we talk about our community, our data. We've been in lots of media, all of those kind of good things. We have a tab on the health effects of noise on humans. Maybe we need to add a little bit of a little section here on biodiversity. That might be your next little bit of assignment there, Dewey. See what you can add to that. Events, I want to share this with you. So you can go to our events page, and so this is where we actually have this event here today. But on every second Saturday of the month, we have drop-ins, and this is where both existing and new members can just drop in and say hello and meet me, and we can, talk about what we're doing with noise and get an update. So I hope to see you there. The other thing that you can do is join us. And so if you don't yet get our newsletter, you can sign up for Noise News here. And I actually recognize that some people don't want a newsletter. They get enough newsletters. So we now just have this button that says, I support no more noise. And then we can count you as a supporter without being spam in your inbox. So that's just another way that we've opened things up for people. And lastly, donations. We thrive by donation, and we are affiliated with Small Change Fund, and so you can make a tax deductible donation through them. But we also accept direct donations through Stripe, and you can do a one-time donation or a monthly donation there, because that's what keeps us going. We are looking for funding, and I'm actually really quite positive about what kind of funding that we're going to get, because we are a new story. We are something new, and everybody has a noise story. I have learned that. So that's kind of a little bit about No More Noise, where we are today. I hope if some of you haven't been into a drop-in or haven't checked in lately, I hope you can come on Saturday. Dewey, is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Just thank you so much for everything and for the discussions as well. It's been fun.
Absolutely. With that, I wish everyone a very good night, and I always wish everyone a very good sleep. Take care, everyone. Good night. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.